Everyone thinks they know their own home. The creak of the floorboards, the way the light falls in the afternoon, the familiar hum of the refrigerator. You feel safe, protected. But what if that safety was an illusion? What if for years you were sharing your space with something else? Something that listened from behind the walls, and sometimes whispered back. This isn't a campfire story. This was sent to me by a viewer named Sarah, and she insisted every word of it is true. After her grandmother passed away, Sarah inherited the old 2-story Victorian house on the edge of town. It was a beautiful, sprawling place, full of antique furniture and the smell of old books. A little isolating, sure, but for a freelance writer looking for quiet, it was perfect. The first few weeks were peaceful. Then the sounds started. It was never anything obvious, just the subtle settling of an old house, or so she told herself. A faint scratching inside the walls she attributed to mice. A soft rhythmic thump, thump, thump from upstairs that would stop the moment she paused her typing to listen. The strangest thing, though, was the heating ducts. This old house had these massive cast iron grates in the floors and walls. Sometimes, late at night, Sarah would hear what sounded like breathing. A soft, wet, rhythmic sighing that would drift up from the vents. It was so faint she'd convince herself it was just the wind whistling through the crawl space. One night she was woken by a voice. It was muffled, indistinct, like someone speaking through a pillow in the room next door. She sat bolt upright in bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. The house was dead silent. She called out, "Hello?" Silence. Then a moment later, a whisper drifted from the heating grate on the floor near her bed. It wasn't a word, it was just a sound, a soft, sibilant shh. She spent the rest of the night with all the lights on, a kitchen knife on the nightstand. The next day, she called a pest control company, convinced it was animals in the walls. The exterminator found nothing. No droppings, no entry points, no nests. But that night, the whispers came back. Clearer this time. They were faint, childlike, and they seemed to be conversing. She couldn't make out words, just the cadence of a conversation happening somewhere inside her walls. She pressed her ear to the cold plaster, her blood running cold. The voices seemed to be coming from behind the master bedroom closet. Driven by a terror that was now outweighing her fear, she emptied out the closet. It was just a shallow space with a single hanging rod. She knocked on the back wall. It sounded hollow, unlike the solid plaster of the other walls. Her hands trembling, she ran her fingers along the edges of the plywood backing. In one corner, hidden by the baseboard, she felt a small, recessed latch. Her breath caught in her throat. With a sickening click, the entire back of the closet swung inward. A wave of cold, stale air washed over her. It smelled of dust and old wood and something else. Something metallic, like copper. She shined her phone's flashlight into the darkness. It wasn't a crawl space. It was a room, a small hidden room, maybe 4 feet by 6. The walls were bare studs and insulation, and on the floor in the center of the room was a nest, but it wasn't made of twigs or newspaper. It was made of things. A tattered baby blanket matted with filth. A few cheap plastic toys, chewed and cracked, and long, dark strands of hair, human hair, woven through it all like twine. And on the wall, scratched into the wood over and over again with what looked like a fingernail or a piece of glass, was a single word, repeated like a mantra. Mine. Sarah stumbled back, slamming the hidden door shut. She didn't pack a bag. She didn't call the police. She just ran. She got in her car and she drove to a motel 20 miles away. She eventually sold the house for a fraction of its value to a developer who planned to tear it down. She never told him why. The crew that demolished the house found nothing. The hidden room was empty, but Sarah says she still hears it sometimes when her own house is too quiet and the central air kicks on. A faint rhythmic sighing from the vents, and a whisper so quiet she thinks she might be imagining it. Mine. We often think of hidden rooms as things of the past, secrets buried in the bones of old Victorians or forgotten castles. But sometimes the most terrifying discoveries are made in the most mundane places. This next story comes from a man named Mark, who learned that a fresh coat of paint and new appliances can't always cover up the sins of a blueprint. Mark and his wife bought a split-level ranch house in a quiet 1970s-era subdivision. It was a starter home, cookie-cutter, affordable, and utterly charmless. But it was theirs. The previous owners were an elderly couple who had moved into assisted living. The sale was quick, quiet, and as normal as could be. During the first month as they painted and unpacked, Mark kept noticing a quirk in the floor plan. The hallway leading to the bedrooms felt short, like there was a chunk of space missing between the master bedroom wall and the garage. He'd tapped the drywall, but it sounded solid. His wife joked he was watching too many home renovation shows. He shrugged it off. Then the noises started. Not whispers or scratching, but thumping. A heavy, solid thud that would come from the general direction of that suspicious wall. It never happened when they were awake and active, only late at night or in the dead quiet of a weekend morning. It was always a single, solitary thud, like something heavy being set down, or something hitting the inside of the wall. One Saturday, Mark decided to investigate. He moved a bookcase in the garage directly on the other side of the master bedroom wall. The concrete foundation was visible, and the drywall was unfinished. And that's when he saw it. The wall wasn't flush with the foundation. There was a gap, a void about 2 feet deep running the length of the wall. And set into the concrete block at the very back of this space was a heavy, rusted metal door. It looked industrial, out of place. It had a large wheel-like handle like you'd see on a submarine or a bank vault. His heart was in his throat. This was no storage closet. The door was locked or sealed shut. He couldn't budge the wheel. He called a locksmith, making up a story about a stuck safe. When the locksmith finally got it open, the smell that hit them was indescribable. Stale, metallic, and sweetly putrid. The door swung inward on screaming hinges, revealing not a room, but a chamber. The space was narrow and deep, lined with concrete, and it was filled floor to ceiling with metal shelves. But the shelves weren't empty. They were lined with jars, dozens of them, glass mason jars filled with a clear yellowish liquid. And suspended in each jar was a small, dark, organic shape. It took Mark a full minute of horrified staring to understand what he was seeing. They were specimens, organs, small animals, things he couldn't and didn't want to identify. On the back of the metal door, scratched into the paint, was a single word: collection. The police were called. The FBI evidence response team showed up. The house was quarantined for 2 days. The official story was that the previous owner, the sweet old man, had been a retired pathologist with a unconventional method of preserving his work. The case was closed. No crime had been committed. Mark and his wife moved out that week. They sold the house to a flipper for a massive loss. Mark says he can't go into a garage anymore, and he can't look at a simple mason jar without feeling a cold wave of nausea. because he'll never truly know what was in all those jars, or why someone would need a secret vault-like chamber to keep them hidden. Some blueprints are better left unread. Some doors are better left unopened. This case is closed, but the question remains. What was he really preserving in there? Subscribe because we're always digging into the unsettling unknown. And click like if you'll be thinking about this story every time you go into your garage. Some houses hold memories, echoes of laughter, arguments of lives lived and ended. But sometimes a house doesn't just remember, it absorbs. It becomes a reservoir for a presence that refuses to move on. This final account comes from a family who didn't find a hidden room. They became the unwanted guests in someone else's. The Miller family, David, Chloe, and their young daughter Lily, moved into a quaint post-war bungalow. It was their first owned home, and they loved its character. The elderly woman who lived there before, Agnes, had passed away peacefully in a hospice, and her estate sold the place fully furnished. They kept most of it. It had a charming, timeless quality. Almost immediately, Lily, who was 3, began talking to someone she called the Lady in the Walls. She'd have full, giggling conversations in her room, claiming the lady told her stories. Her parents wrote it off as a vivid, imaginary friend, a coping mechanism for the move. But the imaginary friend had rules. Lily would insist that a particular chair at the dining table, a sturdy old rocking chair, was not to be used. "That's the lady's chair," she'd say, her tone serious. They'd laugh it off, but whenever anyone sat in it, Lily would have a screaming tantrum unlike any they'd ever seen. Then the smells started. The faint, sweet scent of lavender and rose water would drift through the hallway at random times, though no one wore that perfume. David would sometimes catch the faint sound of a big band-era song humming from an empty room, the melody vanishing when he focused on it. The final straw was the humming. Chloe was putting Lily to bed when the little girl said, "The lady is singing my lullaby." From the wall next to Lily's bed came a faint, raspy, melodic hum. It was a tune Chloe didn't recognize. It was coming from inside the wall. Terrified, David decided to investigate. The humming seemed to be emanating from the back of Lily's closet. He emptied it out, his heart pounding. Unlike the other walls, this one was made of simple, unpainted plywood. He grabbed a hammer and a crowbar. With a splintering crack, he broke through. The space behind wasn't a room. It was a void, about the size of a twin bed running between the studs. And it was not empty. Inside was a nest of yellowed newspapers from the 1940s, a dried-up pot of rouge, a hairbrush tangled with long gray hairs, and a small hand-cranked music box, its mechanism still. This was someone's hiding place, their little den. And on the inside of the plywood wall, facing into the void, was a faded, hand-drawn picture of a woman who looked exactly like the previous owner, Agnes, but young, smiling. And surrounding the drawing were hundreds of careful, tiny pencil marks like tally marks. A count of days or years. They learned later that Agnes had been a hidden child during a time of great conflict, sheltered in secret spaces by her family. She had spent years of her youth in silence, in walls not unlike this one. She hadn't just died in the house. She had lived her entire life within its bones, even after it was safe to come out. The Millers moved the music box and the hairbrush to a display case. They left the space open. The smells and the sounds stopped. Lily stopped talking about the lady. Now she just sometimes waves at the empty rocking chair. Some hidden rooms aren't built to keep things out. They're built to keep someone safe inside, and sometimes the person never really leaves. If you have a story you'd like to share, send it to the email below. And remember, sometimes the most haunting thing a house can inherit isn't its structure, but its soul. Until next time.